I followed Steve over the rickety old perimeter fence. I suppose that I was 7 strides behind him. His father owned the farm up to that line. And all the times my pop had brought me over to play with him, we had never gone past the fence. The farm was big enough to explore. There hadn't been any reason for us to tour any further. Our dads were best friends, so I went over there often as a child. I had basically grown up with Steve. He was a year older than I, and a year braver. I was a 12-year-old in a northwest farm town, and we were always finding ways to keep ourselves amused. Usually we'd play guns or have a warlock battle. If it was too hot, we'd settle down under the old weeping willow tree in the middle of the cow pasture and talk about whatever was on our adolescent minds. We often tried our hands at scaring each other with speculation over what lied hidden in the forest. He'd often try to convince me that there was a whole family that lived in the woods. I would laugh to try to cover up my prepubescent fears and try to change the subject. For us, it was a fairly normal way to spend an afternoon. On that day, however, he had seen me and immediately hurried out the threshold, a grin on his face and eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. I ran behind, expecting him to stop in the field, but he just kept running. He was only a year older, but much taller and faster than me. I lost him, and just kept running in the direction I had last seen him bolt. I followed over the fence and into the tall brush on the other side. I was a fairly decent tracker by that point because of all the hunting trips my dad had taken me on. Although I couldn't see him in the tall grass, I followed the bent pieces and raced through, determined to catch up. After 20 or so yards, the brush thinned out, and I spotted motion just past the forest entrance. My blood was pumping, and I called out to him, but the rustling of leaves in the forest was my only reply. I vigorously picked up my pace to find him, and soon was far into the forest. It was dark there, like the twilight just before dawn. I was excited. I didn't know what was so important that Steve had to show me, but I figured it must be spectacular. I had to slow my pace as the forest became more and more dense. I was tracking him by his footprint, but couldn't believe he could be very far in front of me. English ivy traversed up the trees, ensnaring, and choking them. I had to crawl through to get through a particularly dense section, all the while tracking Steve's movements. I stopped to call to him to slow down. We had been running for an hour, deeper and deeper into the forest. It was getting close to time to head back. Our fathers were going to give us a right whooping if we were gone past sunset. I heard the crack of a tree limb to my right, and figured Steve had circled back to find me. I turned to follow the sound. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary through the dense packed forest of shadows, but I pushed my way forward toward the sound. Ahead 15 yards, I noticed an unusual color in my peripheral. As I raced toward it, detail emerged until I was directly behind it in a clearing of sunlight in the deep terrain. Hunched over was a girl, maybe a year younger than I was. A weathered polka-dot green and white sundress featured on her frail figure. Matted maroon and mud-stain rendered her arms and hair a murky and malevolent afterglow. I peered over her shoulder and saw the head of a gray rabbit lying lost in the leaves, left behind. She stood and steered her head towards my still silhouette. I don't think I had breathed since I first noticed her. Her face hit the waning sunlight. I could clearly see the gray rabbit fur matted against the fresh blood on her face. She smiled at me and cocked her head to the side. I stepped back, but stopped when I hit what felt like a tree. I looked up and saw a foreboding figure with a full beard staring down at me. She giggled to herself and went back to her meal. His large, calloused hands gripped my trembling shoulders, slowly turning me to face the behemoth. His towering frame knelt down, and he brought one hand down to his side, still staring at me with dark eyes. In a gruff and weathered tone, he told me I had never been there, and if I ever returned, I would suffer the same fate as the rabbit. He procured a serrated blade from his side and licked the blood-stained metal. I stayed still as a statue. Fear I had never known was trying to swallow me whole. He stood up once more and told me to never come back. I screamed and ran as fast as I could. I ran through the forest, picking up Steve and my trail along the way. Pure adrenaline pumped as I booked it back to the farm. It was getting darker, blacker out there. I knew that soon it would be too dark to spot the trail on the floor of the foreboding forest. My small body wanted to stop, to regroup, to catch its breath. I couldn't allow that to happen, though, so I pushed further. Finally, I had found the forest exit. I had made it to the tall grass just as the sun set on the old farmhouse. I went through it and over the fence back onto the farm. I didn't allow myself to stop. I just kept running toward the house. As I approached the old willow tree, Steve got up and flagged me down. He asked where I had been, that he hadn't seen me since I ran past him at the tree. He had waited for my return, assuming I had seen something along the fence that I wanted to check out. All these years later, I'm still puzzled. If I wasn't tracking Steve's prints, who was I tracking?